Evolutionary.org, episode 578. Today we're going to talk about changing steroid strategy mid-cycle, smart or not. So this is going to be an interesting one. And, sometimes we plan, put together a cycle. The blueprint is in there. It's just like putting together a blueprint of a road construction or a home construction or a pool or anything. And sometimes things happen, all right, during it. And sometimes you got to change things up. I personally think that it's a really good strategy to always have situations already planned in case things go wrong. Let's say you're going to run a cycle, and it's going to be a bulking cycle. You're going to run a lot of aromatizing compounds. You're going to run test, debol, maybe deca, things that aromatize. And halfway through the cycle, you're a bloated fish and you're getting gyno and you're getting all these problems. Do you just continue the cycle like nothing happened? No. It's okay to change your steroid strategy. Maybe you drop the debol. Maybe you drop the dosage of testosterone. Maybe you drop the deca entirely. Maybe you drop the debol entirely. Maybe you drop the testosterone entirely. And just get the situation on a different track. Same thing with an AI. Aromatase inhibitor, Aromasin, Arimidex. Maybe you're not using enough. Maybe you got to up the dose of that. Get it up, to kind of balance things. Maybe you're not made to run compounds like this that cause estrogen problems. So I think it is important to change up your strategy sometimes and do things a little unconventional to be successful at this and not be stubborn. So, but at the same time, do you want to completely change things and go a completely different route halfway through a cycle? I'm just going to drop all 3 compounds and put in 3 brand new compounds entirely. Let me just run Primo and Masteron that don't aromatize at all in our DHT derivatives with Anavar. Completely switch directions. If you do that, you're just not going to get anywhere, in my opinion. So I'll bring in Mobster on this. Mobster, touch on this. What are your initial thoughts on this question?
When I see this subject come up, Steve, I'm always, why are you changing? What's the issue? Now, I've actually replied in a negative, and Steve's the one that said you need to be flexible, and stuff happens in life. And when you think about stuff that's happened in our lives, Steve, there's going to be situations. So, if someone bloody well dies, your steroid stack, the getting cut, bulking, or whatever else suddenly becomes the most unimportant thing in your life. And patently, obviously, the ability to suddenly stop, go to a PCT and think about doing something later on, or, other things happening in life, changing, and even sometimes literally just the individual response to steroids that you've never used before, whether that's a new brand, a new carry oil, or literally a new steroid from the many steroids that exist, and you just don't get the response that you want to. Flexibility is great. But what I do see, and I know it's going to sound a little bit negative, is and it is an example, and I put this in my pre-show notes, all right? And we see this quite a lot. So this is where I would question the thought process. And it would be something like someone decides to do a bulk, and they're quite lean, and they freak out. Now, there's a little bit of dysmorphia in there. I kind of get it. You're losing your abs. And sometimes what happens is that person will literally, as Steve said, it's not just changing something out because you didn't get, a good response from it. It's not just because something's happened in life. Accidents happen, life happens, divorces happen, stuff happens. No, this is literally someone freaking out. And I made a note as Steve was talking, even just literally sometimes down to, and we see this, Steve, where they didn't realize it was an aromatizer and they didn't realize it was a DHT derivative. And you're like, okay, you're on the forum, you're asking for help, you're saying, should I change what I'm doing? And I'm actually thinking, motherfucker, you didn't do any research. You should have known how most users respond. You should be aware that when you bulk up, you might freak out because you're not the first person this has happened to, and so on and so forth. So it's not that you can't change, and whether it's a smart idea or not, because sometimes it's the only thing that you can do in a situation. But as often as not, Steve, it doesn't come across that way. We're not talking about a lot of life emergencies or very bad response to specific steroid. That's quite rare. As often as not, it's poor research, and of course, these podcasts are going to help you with that, guys, with that kind of information. And literally, it can seem unplanned. They freaked out over losing their abs. They or even gone in the other direction. You know, can't believe how dry I am. Didn't realize I was going to feel like this, and so on and so forth. So sometimes, and I've even said this sometimes, and again, this sounds negative. I've even turned around and said, perhaps steroids aren't for you. Perhaps you should have used SARMs, or you should have used a lower dosage, and so on and so forth. So yeah, listen, guys, you're listening to these shows, you're listening to these podcasts because we pack them full of information so that you don't make these kind of mistakes. So the number one question for me, Steve, would always be, why do you feel the need to change? If you can answer that because it's your body and you can justify it, then we're going to be there on the forums to assist you as best we possibly can. But make sure that it's even starting a steroid section should be done based on good, solid research and a proper thought process. We occasionally will see, and this is why I say that, people that seem to literally think, oh, well, I've been training for 3 months, I should do a steroid sack. And you go, okay, no, perhaps not just now, and so on and so forth. So I challenge the thinking. I want the person to justify what they're doing. And if we can do that, and it's sound and the logic makes sense, there's a good solid reason for it, then we will assist you as best we possibly can. And in that situation, Steve, absolutely be flexible, absolutely make changes. So yeah, what do you think about the reasoning sometimes, that thought process that goes into why they want to make the change?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough question because a lot of times people will go into a cycle, their expectations are off and they expect too much. And what happens is they don't get the results they want. So now they automatically start wanting to increase the dosing. They also automatically want to start bringing in new steroids.
Yeah.
And that can be, that can kind of lead me to what you were kind of saying earlier about getting on people's cases. So in that situation, you have to basically, you're basically, you're the one, it's on you in that situation because you're the one that went in there with unrealistic expectations. It's like going and ahead of the football season and the media hypes up your team, the players on the team, they're a bunch of characters and they predict Super Bowl and all this stuff. But really in reality, they're just an average team, but they run their mouths a lot and the media loves them, the media darlings. Then the season starts and your team starts out the year 0-2, then it's like they're like 3-4, almost halfway through the season. And you're all upset and you're like, just, what the hell? Fire the coach, fire the GM. Well, you went into the season with unrealistic expectations so that the team is just a mediocre team. It's not the team's fault, it's your fault. You had unrealistic expectations in the first place because everyone else who actually follows football knows that your team is fucking just average garbage. They're not an elite team. But you went into the season thinking, oh my God, my team is so great. My team is so great because you listen to the noise and you listen to the bullshit. Same thing with steroids. You can go on there and look at some incredible transformations of the people who have transformed themselves and be like, well, I'm going to turn into that person. Well, that you don't have that person's genetics. You don't have that person's training. You don't have that person's diet. You don't have that person's motivation to push themselves in every workout, as we talked about on prior podcasts. You got to push yourself. You don't have that, and that's okay. But you can't have unrealistic expectations. So if you go in the cycle and you're halfway through and like, oh, I'm not getting the results I want. I'm only up 5 pounds. I thought I'd be up 15 pounds. I thought I'd turn into Jay Cutler or Ronnie Coleman. That's on you. And if you start upping the dose, all you're going to do is cause more side effects. So if that's the reason you want to change things mid-cycle, you need to get your head on straight on that one. Maybe come on the forum, get a log going so we can kind of keep you, engaged. Because a lot of these guys, they'll do logs on our forum and they'll look way better than where they started. But to them, they're like, well, I thought I looked like Ronnie Coleman. And we have to kind of knock it in their head. Like, no, dude, you're making great progress. They're like, wow, my energy's better. I'm sleeping better. Well, that's because you changed your diet. That's because you're exercising. So now your body's getting healthier. Now on your next cycle, you're going to push even more. In the cycle, I'm thinking you're going to push. So we can kind of keep your head on straight. So that's why it's good to come on the forum and get a log journal, a log diary going. So we can help you kind of keep your head on straight. Because it's not all about, oh my God, I have to look a certain way. A lot of times with most people, it's about, how do I feel inside? Am I always getting sick? Am I always, having bowel movement problems? Am I always not sleeping well? Do I always have fatigue? Do I always have to push myself to go to the gym because I don't have the energy? I don't have the motivation. And that's the things that have to get changed a lot of times. It's not even about gains necessarily. And then on the flip side, Mobster, maybe you can talk about how to strength, unrealistic strength. Oh, I'm halfway through the cycle and my bench press has only gone up 15 pounds. That's a lot. That's a big move.
Huge.
15 pounds is a lot.
Huge. Listen,
so what happens? Why don't you talk about that, Mobster? But talk about what happens when you improve too quickly when it comes to strength and some of the things that happens when it comes to injury.
Let me give you an example, right? Steve and I have been doing this for a long ass time. I've been doing it for 43 years. And back when I started, I think I started age 15, started keeping proper training diaries age 18 onwards. I've still got 10-year-old training diaries since I've been here, Stephen. I probably brought a couple with me. Okay, so one of the things I pointed out to people, this is the unrealistic expectation thing that Steve's just talked about. My gains year on year, on and off PDs are average, Steve. And this is what something that Steve said. If you gained 5 pounds on, say, a cycle based around 500 milligrams of test a week, you are doing fantastically well. You really are. Okay. My gains on average, I think off PEDs was averaging 3 to 4 pounds a year, and on PEDs, certainly for a period of time, it's not continuous and it's not forever, but for a period of time, averaged around 5 to 6 pounds per year. That might be 4 pounds on this cycle, 2 pounds on that cycle. And you go, oh, well, that's not huge. That's fantastic, man. I've been training 43 years. If I gained for 30 something of those years, and the average is 4.5 pounds both on and off, that's 120 something pounds, Steve. That's the reason why I'm 330 odd fucking pounds as we do this podcast. And I started training, keeping a diary when I was 175 pounds. So the transformation is unreal, but it's unreal because I've been doing it a fucking long time. Let me give you another quick example, and then I'll talk about what gaining too quick and the bench press thing that Steve just talked about. So yesterday we had a post on the forum, and he was actually discussing or debating whether the product that he got from one of our approved sources was poor because he'd only gained 7 pounds in 7 weeks. And I'm like, no, that's fucking brilliant. That's really serious. That if you keep 5 of those 7 pounds, if you run it another week and gain another pound, keep 6 of the 8 or 9 pounds that you might gain, you will be doing outstanding. The unrealistic expectation is definitely a part of that. That's where people will tweak the dosages or go for harder steroids, ones with more side effects and so on. So we do see that. And again, it's maybe the overpromise. My buddy gained 20 pounds. You're not your buddy, you're you. And I've only gained average amounts of body weight. Let me address the bench press thing. Right. So what am I looking at? I worked out back in the day, Steve, that if I was competing as I regularly did 10 or so years ago in the strength stuff that I was doing, I was only looking for a 5% increase across the board. If I could get 5% better in 12 fucking months, so there's not even 0.5% a month better at the end of the year when I was testing my maximal strength on exercises, I was happy because I was already competitive in the events that I was competing in at 5% less. So if I improved 5%, sometimes my competition would improve 5%. But if I was already winning or I was with a chance of winning, then 5% was all I was looking for. If that was a 100 kilo bench, It's 105 kilo bench. So 225 becomes 235. That's fan-fucking-tastic, guys. And again, year on year. At that particular point in time, I've been training for 30 years. So again, if you're averaging a 5% increase across the board, it's fantastic. Now, let me address the point that Steve made in regards to what happens if you do get too big or too strong too quickly. The gaining of the body weight thing, the cycles, and these are rare, of individuals who gain, for example, I've heard of stories of people on Anadrol gaining 20 pounds. We've discussed this. You really, really, really don't want to blow up 20 pounds, especially if your frame's kind of normal or you was average or a little bit above average size to begin with, because 20 pounds is a lot of weight. And I don't just mean that stating the bleeding obvious. I mean, Steve and I have discussed this. You are carrying around 20 pounds of new tissue, assuming it was all meat and not water. That is horrendously difficult to adapt to. It takes me, even just gaining 5 pounds back in the day, Steve, it would take me 3 months to feel comfortable with a 5 pound gain, because I'm going to feel, if I'm already heavy and I become heavier, I'm now that much harder to walk up and down the stairs, do cardio, do any kind of conditioning work, throw a kettlebell around, do swings. It's just, and then it's just mass on my bone structure, sitting on my tendons and whatever else. What we always used to see, and this is where the injury thing comes in, Steve, and the bench press would be a great example. So how many times we see 80s and 90s bodybuilders blowing their quads, but so many, and I'm thinking even Kevin Levrone, blowing their pec. And there are videos of Kevin, the Maryland muscle machine back in the day, doing 4 and even 5 plates a side. So 500-pound bench press, basically, Steve, 495-pound bench press, and blowing out his pec. And fantastic surgeon was able to fix it, put it back on. And what happened was that Kevin would do no PEDs in the off season, would typically drop down 30 pounds, ease back on the training, and then kill the training as he ran into the Mr. Olympia, grow into the competition, but at the same time put a lot of mass back onto the body, and of course use some performance enhancing drugs to assist his process. And he would turn from a kind of muscular tennis pro to a fucking monster. And it wasn't uncommon, so I'm not just picking on Kevin. And what happened was that you put on this mass very, very quickly. The strength as well, 5 plates a side is a lot of weight. It's like 1% of the gym. And you blow up, and your connective structure, your tendons, your sinews, the fascia, etc., all the things around the muscle that holds it onto the bone, take time to get strong. And people blow up and they get injured. I think there's one more thing that I sometimes see, dear Steve, and again, it's just a process. Steroids can make training easy, and it can make gaining muscle easy and getting stronger easy. That's the fucking reason why we use them. What sometimes freaks people out is, and especially applies to the stronger steroids, how goddamn tired or lethargic or toxic you're going to feel. It's the reason why Steve and I talk about sensible training, proper nutrition, and so on and so forth. And as Steve said, when it's done right, with fasting, with good nutrition, with us encouraging you to recover properly, you can feel like a god. You can feel amazing. And of course, this is the pluses. And what I wouldn't want to change that stack or that cycle at all. If that's how you feel right now, keep on doing what you're doing. But carry on trucking, motherfucker, because that's exactly what we want for you. We want your skin to glow. We want your hair to shine. We want your eyes to be bright. And that's just you tidying up your diet, eating vegetables, getting fruit into your diet, having some fasting, having some gut rest, working on your recovery, not spending 3 hours in the gym, just getting in there, killing it and getting out. And that's the kind of logs that we like, and the advice that we like to give out and encourage. Equally, and it's kind of obvious to me, Steve, if I'm training double hard for a record or for a competition, I know I'm going to feel fatigued. I should feel fatigued, but it blows some people's minds and they're not ready sometimes for the stress. It's why we encourage on-cycle protection. It's why we make sure that you look after your organ health and so on and so forth. But if you've never experienced that level of fatigue, literally just because you're training harder in the gym, it can be something that surprises you. I was expecting to feel like a god and I don't. Okay, well, look how poor your diet is. You're working construction and you're training at 11 o'clock at night. You're barely getting enough sleep. Literally on our logs, as a lot of the people that run logs keep the amount of sleep that they're doing there. Some of them are getting 10 hours a day. I don't get 10 hours a day, Steve. It's just difficult. So things like that, and the expectation that Steve said, and the sense of the lack of experience of a particular steroid. Trend is a great example. Some people feel amazing on Trend, and they will literally say, tongue slightly in cheek, Trend is God. But equally, it can make other people feel toxic. So your expectations, and specifically, I think some here, the unique experience. I wrote down the individual response. There are certain PEDs that I like because I know exactly how my body responds to them. And there's others that I would only use for a very short period of time, especially if I was going into a competition, because I know that I'm going to feel rough because of the training. I'm pushing my body into new places, world record territory. And equally, I know that this PED is going to make me feel a little bit shit. But that's I'm owning it. I know that I'm going to feel like that. That's why I'm training so damn hard. I want no one to beat me. I want that world record. And I know that there's going to be a sort of sense about me in terms of the PED and how it's going to make me feel. But I know that the results are going to make me glad that I've done it. But if you're new to it, if you like the experience, and this is typically what we're seeing here, very rarely is someone that's run more than a couple of cycles when they'll come on and they'll say, you know, I need to change everything up. And you go, okay, so we own it, question it. And then obviously, if you absolutely need to, of course. I mean, one of the comments I made here, Steve, I don't want to touch on this now. Sometimes, and I think Stevesmi and both, I have agreed on this, we just say stop the cycle. Because if you're not competing, if it's not for specific dates or period of time, it's just for self-improvement, for yourself, for no other particular reason, then stop the cycle, do a PCT, give yourself a break, and come back and do a new cycle. Run something better, because it's just a few weeks down the road, Steve. It doesn't have to be today. If it's for a competition, sure. And we actually see this in competition. Let me touch on that as well. Pro bodybuilders, and we've discussed competition stacks, kind of have 3 stages. And if you looked at each stage individually, you kind of say, well, that's a bulking part, that's a recomposition part, and that's a competition part. Right at the end, they're cutting down there. And these can easily be 16 weeks cycles, sometimes slightly longer. I'm going to say 20 weeks if you're at the Olympia. As long as the year off is possible, but literally 20 weeks broken down to about 3 different sort of compartments or phases. And these cycles, the middle, the start, the middle, and the end will completely differ. There might be the odd 1 or 2 things that are still in there, but the structure, the way it's put together, is completely different. The end stack, the cutting down for a competition part will be completely different from what you see at the beginning. So for them, it's a deliberate process. But for a typical listener, a typical user of PEDs who just wants to enhance their physique and get into shape and be stronger or whatever else, I prefer a structured and planned process, researched what's the best PED for what I want, and so on and so forth. Make sure I've got time to get into shape. And unless something comes up like a holiday or some sort of family disaster or whatever else, leave it as it is. Don't freak out. You can always cut back on the dosages. And as I say, I mean, flexibility, fine, but I prefer planned. And flexibility is there because, of course, of the stuff like we said with emergencies, whatever else. But it sometimes feels unplanned, and it sometimes feels like people are freaking out. And it sometimes just comes down to a lack of experience, or as Steve said, the expectations. And of course, and we have touched on this, you get injured. Absolutely. Don't keep doing that stupid shit that fucked you up and got you injured, Steve. We see that. If you have torn a pec or a quad, or if you have strained a vertebrae or something in your neck, absolutely stop what you're doing, because we don't want you to get any more injured. What do you think on that one, Steve?
Yeah, and we finish up this podcast. Look, I just want to say, that this is flexible. I always tell people, have a blueprint going into cycle, but be willing to be a little flexible. And when I mean a little flexible, I mean switch things up, switch dosages, switch your AIs, switch your livers, add more liver support, things like that. Just monitor yourself. And there's both ways can be wrong. You can go on the cycle hard-headed, be like, I'm going to do the cycle this way, and I'm not going to change anything no matter what happens. My blood pressure is up 25 points. I'm just going to keep things the same and not adjust anything. No, if your blood pressure is up 25 points, you can give yourself a stroke. So you got to look at, do I need to lower my dosing? Do I need to up my support supplements? Do I need to up my cardio? Should I have done more cardio before I did the cycle to strengthen my heart more? These are things to look at. You know, you're going into the cycle, you start getting nipple irritation. Do you just say, you know what, fuck it, I'm just going to continue the cycle, not change anything? No, listen to your body. Very, very important. Listen to your body. Those are 4 words that you need to write down, okay, on your calendar. If you have a calendar, you know, where you're keeping track of what days you're dosing and everything, put those 4 words down. Listen to your body. If your body is saying something is off, then adjust things during the cycle. Don't just keep things the same and hope everything works out. You've got to be smart about this. But at the same time, having a blueprint going into the cycle is a great thing. There used to be a time where you went on forums and you posted your cycle, and then halfway through your cycle decided to tweak some things, and then some old, quote unquote, old school guy would go on there and say, oh, that's ridiculous. You should just keep things the way they are. Finish your cycle. How else are you going to know what happens? Blah, blah, blah. How are you going to learn from that? It's a stupid logic. It's like, imagine a football team. They start the year like 0-5, and they're supposed to be like a good team. They're not tanking or anything. They start the year 0-5. Are they not supposed to make changes? You know, or are they just going to let's just keep doing what we've been doing? Or you're going to keep losing if you keep doing what you're doing, most likely. You got to change something up. And there's no, you know, there's no, it's not being a coward to change things up in life. Sometimes you just got to change things up, and things have to be switched a little bit. And this way it's optimal and you're able to get results. So look, at the end of the day, the best thing you can do is get a log on the forum. And then this way, if you have to adjust something mid-cycle, we can kind of help you and guide you and change things correctly. That's what I recommend. So Mobster, final thoughts? Take us a disclaimer.
I just find myself nodding away here to Steve in terms of pretty much everything that he's just said. I always start with a plan. I always encourage the listeners and the forum users to go off and do research. Absolutely, especially easy if you have a log and we can see what you're doing. Sometimes it's super easy for us to go in and say, hang on, you're not doing enough of this, you're not getting enough sleep. Leave the cycle as it is, but change this, change that. And of course, it might even just be that you thought you could handle a gram of this or half a gram of that, and you need to ease the back off. That just makes sense to me, Steve. I think it's also probably in my particular case, and maybe that's why I think that particular way, I am that experienced. I know what works for me. And so therefore I'm at that point where I don't need to change things up, because I know that if I do this is how I'm going to feel. This is the result. This is the number that's going to be on the bar at the end, and so on and so forth. So I've sort of kind of already got that down pat. But for newbies, maybe I'm forgetting sometimes. You're coming in, you don't know those things. You don't know how you're going to respond. You don't know how you're going to feel. You're not aware of the results that you're likely to get, and so on and so forth. And that's where us older, wiser heads can say, hang on, 5 pounds is great. 5% in your bench is great. Yes, if you feel like death, you shouldn't keep doing it. If you're having nosebleeds, motherfucker, for sure, you need to stop doing what the hell you're doing, and so on and so forth. This is what, come on the forums, talk to us, post some comments, let us know what you think. Please note, we are not doctors, and opinions are ours, is our view and based on our experience and views on the topic. And podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.